Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 3 of DBR Bites. It's Monday, January 23rd, 2023, and Duke basketball has another big game tonight on the road when they take on Virginia Tech at Castle Coliseum in Blacksburg. That game at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. I'm Donald Wine. There's no Jason Evans today, but I do have Sam Klein with me. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Donald. And I guess before we start, we don't need to do this too in depth, but condolences to Daniel Jones on the end of his season, which ended in stunning and terrible fashion on Saturday against the Eagles.
Yeah, that was brutal.
Tough look.
But he had a great season, so we're happy about that. You know,
people are talking about Daniel Jones, and not because they're wondering, wait a minute, why is the guy who has no useful stats from college being considered a first-round draft pick? They're not talking about him like that anymore.
Nope, they're talking about like contract extensions and stuff like that. Which, hey, good for him. Enough about football. We are here to preview the Hokies and what we can expect from them. So, Sam, let's get right to it. Let's start with the records. 11-8 on the season, 1-7 in the ACC. I'll talk about how they got there in just a second. KenPom still ranks them as the 45th or 47th best team. So there's still a pretty good team out there. Why? They have a few pretty good wins. One against Penn State, one against UNC back when they were good. Oklahoma State and Dayton. Their only bad loss is against BC. So let me tell you how they got to 11-8. They started out the year actually quite well. They were 11-1. And then after they beat UNC to open up ACC play back on December 4th. They then followed that up with wins against Dayton, Oklahoma State, and Grambling. So you're thinking, I remember us when we did our ACC preview, we're like, Virginia Tech is going to be one of these teams.
We said there's nothing wrong with Virginia Tech, right? We were like, heading into ACC season, it was like, wow, they are one of the revelations in the ACC. Yeah. And like you said, they had good wins early in the season. It wasn't like they played a Seth Greenberg schedule, and it was like, we're 11-1 against, the KenPom bottom 50.
Right. I think we even mentioned, like, this is not your Seth Greenberg coach Virginia Tech team. This is the team that's ready to make some noise. And they made some noise at that point. It was just the wrong kind of noise. Since they've fully gotten to ACC play back on December 21st, they have lost 7 in a row. They have not won since they converted fully to ACC play. So it's been over a month since we've seen a Virginia Tech notch in the win column. But also many of these games, Sam, have been close. BC by 5 in overtime, Wake by 2, Clemson by 3, NC State by 4, Syracuse and UVA both were 10-point losses. But even those were like, free throws at the end kind of put it out of reach. And the most recent one was Saturday night at Littlejohn. They lost to Clemson by 1 point. So this team is in a downward spiral, but they're not really getting blown out. They're just losing close games, which, Sam, it means to me that we'll probably need to just expect a close back and forth affair. Do you agree?
Definitely. And as demoralizing as I'm sure the last month has been for Virginia Tech, when Duke comes to town, they will snap themselves right up and get fully invested in these games. Duke has had a ton of tough games in Castle Coliseum since Virginia Tech joined the ACC. And the other thing to note, Donald, here is that, as you said, Virginia Tech hasn't suffered terribly in the metrics because these games have been so close. Virginia Tech isn't considered that much worse than Duke when you sort of look at overall statistical performance. And in the realm of, let us remind Duke fans how much worse it can feel than it does right now, because I think some of the teeth gnashing subsided a bit this week with Duke winning against Miami. But man, if Duke fans, I don't want to know what would have happened if Duke had started the ACC season 1-7, even if the metrics had kept up, because there would have been a ton of, this and that and this, whatever. Everybody calm down. That's my thing before we kind of talk about what to expect sort of in detail against Virginia Tech.
Yeah. And Sam, usually we talk about the general metrics. You kind of breached it a little bit, but before we get into those fully, I want to talk about some of the players that Virginia Tech has that Duke needs to watch out for. So give us a look at who they are.
Yeah. So Virginia Tech has a couple guys that I think Duke fans will remain familiar with. And I don't want to dwell too much on the stomping that Virginia Tech gave to Duke at the end, in the second half last year in the ACC tournament. But they have a few of those guys back in the mix. Justin Mutz is still here. Hunter Couture is still here for Virginia Tech. Sean Padula, who played a minimal role last year as a freshman, is playing a much expanded role. And then they also have a stellar transfer in Grant Bazile. I didn't look up ahead of time if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So.
I think it's Basile. I honestly don't know. I've heard his name, but it's one of those things where on the fly, I didn't remember it.
I'm usually good for that sort of thing. But anyway, so Virginia Tech's got those guys who are playing a lot of minutes. It's not clear to me that they've got a total handle on their offensive production. The numbers are only sort of middling for all of these guys. There are bright spots. Basile is hitting nearly 40%, like 39% of his 3-pointers, which is a great sign for a Virginia Tech team that otherwise is not a great 3-point shooting team. Hunter Couture is also a pretty decent shooter. Padula has been, I think, the biggest revelation for Virginia Tech this year. As a sophomore, as I said, he didn't play much as a freshman. He's playing almost every minute of every game this year as a sophomore, and he's doing a good job distributing the ball along with Justin Mutz on the perimeter. But both of them are also fairly turnover prone. So the number one thing I think that you have to know about this Virginia Tech offense is that it is a bit frantic. So Duke hopefully is going to be able to capitalize on turnovers in this one. The other thing to note about this Virginia Tech team, they're not a fantastic rebounding team. I'm sure, Donald, you're going to talk a little bit about the hopeful rebounding advantage that Duke has in this one, because that is going to be a key here. Virginia Tech is not bringing a ton of size to overwhelm the likes of Derek Lively and Kyle Filipowski and Ryan Young in this one. So while I am always nervous when Duke goes on the road, I think my take, at least sort of looking at the personnel, is that Duke should have some meaningful one-on-one advantages against Virginia Tech that they can hopefully exploit on Monday.
So it's interesting you say that, especially that last part about the one-on-one matchups, because yes, there are quite a few that I can think of. Kyle Filipowski, I think, is going to be a decent, mismatch for whoever they throw on him, because even if they throw their biggest guy on there, you're leaving Derek Lively or Ryan Young wide alone with somebody who is several inches shorter than him. But here's the thing about Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech wants you to play stagnant. Most teams, they don't want you to move the ball around. They're very, successful at keeping their opponents from getting a lot of assists. They want that one-on-one basketball, and that's kind of how they keep things close. And we're coming off of a game where we had 19 assists on 25 made baskets. So it's interesting because the strategy may not change, but Virginia Tech is going to try and force Duke to play a lot of one-on-one ball and isolate guys and try to make them beat you on the dribble. And I think that's the interesting thing about this offense compared to, Duke playing against Miami on Saturdays. Miami offered a lot of opportunities for Duke to move the ball around and get open spaces and get 3-pointers. I think the one thing about Virginia Tech on defense, they do defend the 3 fairly well. Obviously, we have not been shooting the ball very well, save for, shooting 42% against Miami on Saturday from beyond the arc. But the one thing on offense that I think you did not mention that I wanted to highlight was they do not go to the free throw line often. In 363 teams in Division I basketball, they're 348th in their percentage of free throws attempted to field goals attempted. So these guys are really looking to take shots, but they also aren't driving the lane and trying to win at the free throw line. They're trying to make baskets. They are decently efficient on offense, but the main thing is they're going to try and take shots. They're not going to really put themselves in position to go to the line and make free throws, which some of these guys are good from the line, but a lot of these guys just haven't had the reps to kind of do that.
And they're spending a lot of the time noodling on the perimeter and turning the ball over, because both,
exactly,
as I said, both Mutz and Padula are turning the ball over a lot. And so, Duke is hopefully not fouling in pursuit of that. It means that a healthy Jeremy Roach is very helpful here. It means that a healthy Jalen Blakes, I don't know if we're getting a healthy Jalen Blakes, but a healthy Jalen Blakes would be very useful for instigating the turnovers and sort of making the Duke players' lives easier with more runouts and less, half-court offense creation.
I mean, on Jalen Blakes, I know we talked about the mask that he was wearing the other day, which made it where he didn't really feel like he was himself. Obviously, with it being just over 48 hours since that game, I don't think he's had a chance to actually do the surgery they were talking about to fully set his nose. So expect him to play and wear that mask again tonight.
I don't get the impression that he's going to be doing that anytime soon. So the question is less when is he going to sit out for the surgery, I think, and more how much more comfortable is he able to get with the potentially one extra day of practice in the mask to make it better. And we're not going to know that until the Blue Devils take the floor on Monday night. Hopefully after that, that they do get a few more days off after that. This is the Saturday to Monday quick turnaround. Maybe that extra break between the game against Virginia Tech and then the following weekend will give him more time to sort of reintegrate.
Yeah. Two more things about Virginia Tech before we get out of here. One, when Duke has the ball, you mentioned the fact that Virginia Tech is not great at rebounding. They are decently effective at defensive rebounding, but Duke is one of the top 5 teams in the country in offensive rebounding percentage. So we're looking for that matchup to be well in favor of Duke. But on defense, when Duke is playing defense, they cannot give Virginia Tech any opportunities for second chance points. Virginia Tech is not a good offensive rebounding team. Duke is a very good defensive rebounding team, and they need to make that mismatch well known, get balls and get out. And really, I think the one-on-one matchups that you were talking about, I think will be neutralized in the sense that if we get balls and we're able to do fast breaks, or at least in transition, we may be able to get some shots in the corner. We may be able to get some shots in the wing or have a guy down low. If, as good as like maybe a Derek Lively can run, if Jeremy Roach is able to be effective at driving the lane and then in getting the first defender towards him, he can throw lobs to, whoever's down low to get layups all day long.
If I zoom back out and talk about the schedule again for Virginia Tech, the other thing to note here is that they are probably, we know they're feeling demoralized at the moment because of this 7-game losing streak, but they had Virginia middle of last week, lost there, as you said. Clemson this weekend, another team that has been good in the ACC overall. Virginia, of course, is one of the better teams in the conference. Duke this weekend. Syracuse not having as good of a year. They're playing them next weekend, and then they get Miami and Virginia again right after that. So it's a pretty tough stretch for the Hokies here. Not that any of them are getting distracted by anything but the Duke game. So let's see if we can if Duke can put part of the another nail in Virginia Tech's coffin in terms of postseason eligibility, or at least in postseason contention rather. I'm sure that they're sort of on the edge now of not making the NCAA tournament, but hope that for Duke's sake that at least that trend continues.
Yeah, and we see them again on February 25th in Cameron too. So we'll have a couple of times to exact revenge. I think the one final thing I wanted to note, which is kind of a quirk about Castle Coliseum, if you've watched the game there, you've noticed that on the end lines, the rafters, if you will, are a little bit like higher up than they normally are for most arenas. Like most arenas, you have fans going all the way down to the floor, but there's like kind of a little like break. I wouldn't call it a wall, but like the fans end a little bit further up. And what I've learned from this is that a lot of times Duke teams don't shoot well from behind the arc at Castle Coliseum because the sight lines are a little bit different than they've experienced in other arenas, namely, Cameron. I mean, Cameron, there's, everywhere you look, there's a fan that's going to be blocking your view, but there's going to be like a nice little line of demarcation right around that box above the rim. And I think, initially I hope guys are able to get shoot arounds. And again, with Jalen Blakes in his mask, being able to see a little bit better than he did on Saturday, because I think those sight lines are going to be a little tricky, and they've always proven to be tricky when Duke comes to town. So that's an interesting little quirk about Castle Coliseum. I will say this, you mentioned about the little revenge factor. Revenge is a dish best served cold. So let's make sure we cool their jets and make it.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, so let's do that. Again, tonight, 7 p.m. ESPN, Duke versus Virginia Tech. Kim Palm predicts this as a 1-point Virginia Tech win, but that's why we play the games. So that will do it for this episode of DBR Bites. Sam Klein, thank you for joining me on this one, and thank you all of you out there for listening. We'll be back later on. I don't know if it'll be tonight or tomorrow, but it'll be very, very soon with a recap of the Virginia Tech game. So enjoy the game tonight. Go Blue Devils, and here is the Duke band to take us home.